I lived in Seoul, South Korea for 2.5 years and now Tokyo for 5 years.
Drinking culture, I think in Japan and in Korea is very different.
When it comes to beauty standards for women, any differences you noticed?
Yeah, so when I was living in Korea,
Actually, that's the biggest difference. The people who went to Korea, I think they know what I'm talking about.
About getting visa, I feel in South Korea it's a bit easier than in Japan.
Can you say something in Japanese and Korean so that people can tell he was speaking both?
일본에도 한국에도 둘 다 살기 좋아하는데 2年間韓国に住んでたら去年日本に帰ってきました。
Hey guys, how you doing? I'm Takashi. So today I'm going to interview people who lived in both Japan and Korea, asking them which country is better to live in as a foreigner. Okay, let's get started. Please introduce yourself.
hi, my name's Shannon. I'm originally from LA, but I'm half Korean and half white, and I live in Tokyo.
You lived in Korea as well, right?
Yeah, I lived in Korea for 2 years.
My name's Armin. I'm from California. I lived in Japan for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. And then I was in Korea for 2 years during COVID, and I just moved back to Japan last year.
I'm from Spain. I've been in Japan for 2 years, and I also lived in South Korea for 1 year.
My name is Elijah. I'm from Houston, Texas originally. I lived in Korea for about 2 years, for 15 months in Seoul, and about 9 months in Chonan. And now I'm currently living in Tokyo working as a researcher for anthropology research.
I'm from Connecticut, New York City area. I lived in Seoul, South Korea for 2.5 years and now Tokyo for 5 years.
Yeah, my name is Aru. I'm from Russia. I was living in Korea, Seoul, for 1 year by studying at the Korean University. And now I'm living in Japan for almost 1 year. Tokyo.
I am from a British family, but I was born and raised in Japan. Our family has been in Japan for 3 generations now. So yeah, I lived in Korea about 6 months, and now I'm back living in Japan again.
韓国に住まれてた日本人ってこと大丈夫ですか？
はい、住んでました
どのくらい。
韓国の、ソウル、
ソウル
はい
おー、
中心部にいました。
どういう理由で韓国に住むことになりました？
夢を追っかけてアイドル活動。
アイドル活動。
はい。
K-POP とかですか？
そうです、そうです、そうです。
You came to Japan from Korea.
Yes.
What are the differences between Japan and Korea?
Certain groups in Korea are very outspoken when it comes to politics or the things that they think about and like the views that they have on certain issues.
Maybe easier to meet like Korean people when you're out at a bar or like nightclub or something. Like they're more social for the first. Like they're more talkative. They're more maybe kind of interested to know like who you are, or maybe they just want to practice their English, which is fine. In Japan, I think like people are obviously still nice and like open to foreigners, but it takes a little bit more time to like build a relationship with Japanese people. But then once you become friends, it's like a really strong friendship. It takes some time, but once you become friends, they're like friends for life.
So Tokyo is a much larger city. There's a lot that you can do here and there's a lot of different populated areas. It's beautiful and each one has its own culture. You can walk forever because it's not a super mountainous area, this area of Tokyo. So you can walk for a really long time. You can bike for a really long time and not be too exhausted, which I love about this city. Whereas in Korea, it's a lot more hilly. There are popular areas are kind of spread out.
Yeah, I
so like
that, yeah.
Hongdae, Itaewon, Gangnam, and then kind of in between that, it's more like residential. So there's not much to really do or see in between kind of those major areas, whereas in Tokyo, it's more integrated.
In Japan, much more quiet.
You compare Seoul and Tokyo, and you think Tokyo is quiet.
Yeah, I compare Seoul and Tokyo is much more quiet than Seoul. In terms of locals, because of course in Tokyo there are a lot of foreigners, even in Seoul, but in Seoul people are more loud than in Tokyo. Actually, that's the biggest difference. The people who went to Korea, I think they know what I'm talking about.
So I worked in the K-pop industry in Korea, and what I noticed is a lot of times they're more direct and they kind of say it how it is, which on one hand, it's hard if you're maybe more sensitive, but on the other hand, it's kind of endearing. I think there's a lot more like playful teasing and like personal questions. So that line between work and personal life is more blurred in my experience. And in Tokyo, I kind of feel like that line is more divided. So, people at my job don't really like chat to other coworkers unless there's kind of a reason or like it's about work. So in that way, it can maybe feel a little bit more lonely. But I think, if you're more introverted or you like your privacy, it can be a good thing. But it's just different from Korea.
In South Korea, people is competitive, not about themselves, like with other people. In Japan, I think like they are competitive with themselves, like Japanese people, like just trying to improve themselves.
So when it comes to housing in Korea, different system from Japan. The deposit is a big lump sum money that the owner will invest, and then they'll make some money off of that while you've been living in the house. And then when you leave the house, they'll return the original amount that you've put in. So it was quite an interesting system where you have to make sure you have that money ready to give over, because in Japan, I think it's only just like 1 or 2 months worth of deposit. So very different system.
日本人の女性は韓国人男性からしたらすごい優しい。
韓国人の女性って結構なんか強いっていうか、結構主張激しいっていう。
はっきりしてるのが韓国人女性だったら、日本人女性はちょっと丸い。
実際どう思いますそれは？
韓国人女性は全体的にすごいはっきりしてさっぱりしてるなって思いました。意見を言い合うのに分かりやすいように直球で言うっていうんですかね。
どっちがシャイだと思います？韓国人と日本人。
日本人じゃないですか。
どうしてと思いますか？
言っていいのかなとか、その恥ずかしさもあるのが日本人だと思ってるんで、韓国人あんまりそういう一歩後ろに下がるっていうのがあんまりないのかなって思いました。
パーソナリティはどうでした？なんか違いとか。
彼女とか家族とかじゃなくても、その時一緒にいる女の人を誘導してあげるっていうか、気遣いが日本人男性と違うなって思いました。
日本人のとかあんまりやらないですよ、そういうの。確かに。そう、あんまりやらない。Which country is harder to live in as a foreigner?
If you don't know the language, I think both countries are hard to live. Because in Korea and in Japan, if you don't know local language, it's really hard to live in.
I felt like more the service industry in Korea didn't really speak a lot of English, so it was tough for me to do stuff day to day, like go shopping, get in a taxi, order at a restaurant, unless I knew Korean. Whereas in Japan, the tourist industry is so large here that most restaurants, they can find someone that I can communicate with, and most taxi drivers know a little bit, so it's a bit easier here.
In Japan, you can go literally days without talking to anybody. Like for the first 3 days that I was here, I didn't really speak or interact with a lot of people. And a lot of the restaurants, a lot of the activities are maybe not designed for one, but they're comfortable with having one person.
If you're an extrovert, Seoul is the place to be. It's just a different vibe. And there's also like not so many things you can do by yourself. Like, for example, if you go to a restaurant in Seoul, barbecue place, for example, usually you have to go with somebody because the minimum order amount is like 2 people.
About getting visa, I feel in South Korea it's a bit easier than in Japan. There are like more type of visa and it's a bit more easy to get. In Japan, it's a bit complicated though.
Maybe another thing in Korea is that washing machines or like refrigerators are already in the house, so you don't have to prepare as much.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The only thing I had to prepare was like a bed and maybe a table, but it's very minimal that it makes it easier for foreigners to just start living, whereas in Japan, everything has to be prepared, right? You have to buy everything and move everything over, so that part was really easy.
What about Japanese people and Korean people? Any differences? Like locals?
And in Korea, it's really fast. Koreans like to say balli balli, which means like hurry, hurry, mitaina. That goes into everything, I think. Not just making friends maybe, but lifestyle. Everything is done quickly in Korea. So if you're like an extrovert, you like to get out and do things, meet people, maybe Korea would be more fun, so to speak.
Korean culture, like drinking culture, I think in Japan and in Korea is very different. So
Korean people force you to drink.
okay, I wouldn't say force, but you're not forced by your boss to drink. There's a unspoken and sometimes spoken societal pressure to drink because it's seen as something that is either bonding with coworkers in a workplace environment or it's like a community thing with your friends. I think what both places have in common is people passing out though. Yeah. People pass out, they throw up, whatever. But I think in Korea it's a little bit more intense.
What about English skills of local people?
Yeah, that's Korean people on average, I would say, speak way better English than Japanese people. If you think about it, there's way more Korean people living abroad or interested in living abroad than Japanese people. Maybe that's it. I think because of that, like if you're just somebody who's gonna decide they're gonna live their whole life in Japan, then why bother to learn English? Right? Japan is very accommodating, especially nowadays, to tourists and foreigners that are living here. But so is Korea.
Definitely like the young population in Korea, they start English a little earlier. They're embracing the Western culture a lot there. So from what I've heard, maybe even in just the last 5 years, the younger population is speaking much more English. And they're definitely very engaging when I went back in September to talk to me and speak English.
Probably in Korean society, they put like a very high priority on education in general, but English education, I think, in particular, there was very many English language hagwon. And so I think just like amount of studying that Korean children does is pretty high. So that's led to a lot of younger people being able to speak English.
In Korea, they speak English better. Pronunciation is also better. Well, not better, like just more. Like they speak more English in Korea, maybe. In Japan, yeah, I can find less people that can speak English, but they try their best. That's so nice. Like even if they don't understand, they try to, I don't know, look on the Google translator. Yeah, they try to help anyway a lot. So it's so nice, so cute.
It's a very long flight to visit Japan or Korea. You can watch movies or listen to music, but honestly, you can get easily bored. But here's a secret so you do not get bored. The ROG Ally X has been my travel buddy for past 3 months and I absolutely love it. It's a favorite gadget for traveling. It runs on Windows, so you can play all your PC games anywhere. Steam, Xbox Game Pass, anything. You can even plug into monitor or TV with a keyboard and mouse. You can use it as a PC. It runs all games smoothly without lag. I'm now playing Genshin and Elden Ring, and they both run without issues. The ROG Ally X is perfect if you want to play games everywhere, especially on the plane or when you're traveling. It is also perfect for Mac users who, like me, don't want to switch to Windows. The views towards foreigners, especially Western people. Any differences you notice? Korean locals and Japanese locals? Maybe it's a little bit hard to answer because you're from Japan, but
Yeah. I felt like in Korea there was only one job that foreigners did, and everybody assumed you were that one job, an English teacher.
Oh, is it the same in Japan though?
Very similar, but I feel like there's a bit more variety in what foreigners can do in Japan, maybe IT or stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in Korea, like if you're a foreigner, the first question they'll ask is, are you an English teacher? And so that was quite interesting. The conversations always went in that direction. So,
But I think in general, like Japanese people kind of have a more enthusiastic reaction, like, oh, America, like, and then after that, it's the same for Korean and Japanese people. It's like, oh, I'm studying English or I want to learn English, and then the conversation is kind of about language. So it's pretty similar, but I think Japanese people do get more like enthusiastic. Yeah.
I would say in my experience, I had a lot more people kind of randomly come up to me in Korea compared to Japan. In general, there's probably like a higher level of interest in foreigners in Korea, like on average. There's a bar that's really close to my apartment that I usually go to, and there it has like a lot of people who are quite interested in talking about like, foreign subjects and things like that. If you, interested in making those international connections, there's like a fair amount of opportunities in both countries to do that.
I think that Japanese people get used to live with foreigners, already.
There are more foreigners here in general.
Yeah, more foreigners than even in Seoul, because South Koreans love foreigners. They always try to help them, but I don't think that they got used to live with foreigners.
In Japan, it's a little bit easier to be foreigner, maybe. Maybe like Korea was not very famous like just 10 years ago. Now it got like popular because of the K-drama idols. So maybe they are not too used to foreigners yet. I mean, the new generation used to them, like they speak English well, though radical change, like from not foreigners to a lot of foreigners. So elderly people maybe is not too used to foreigners. And I sometimes felt like they don't like so much. Or
Compared to Japanese elders.
yes, exactly.
自分日本出身って言った時にその人たちのリアクションはどういうのが多かったですか？
すっごい積極的に日本語喋ってくれます。みんな日本が大好きだし、日本人だって言ったらもう自分の知ってる日本語もう何でもいいから日本語喋ってくれて、日本語喋る韓国人の大体はアニメが好きだったりするんですよ。アニメドラマ。だから知ってる言葉の単語がセリフだったりするんですよ。
In Tokyo, foreign community is like pretty huge, right? Everyone knows each other. It's quite big,
Right.
What about Seoul?
I'm not really involved in the foreign community in both.
You have
countries.
Japanese friends, yeah.
Yeah, all my friends are basically Japanese because I wanted to really learn Japanese, so I tried not to spend time with foreigners. But Japan, yeah, like you said, everyone kind of knows each other. You run into people at events. I'm just now kind of getting into that because I speak Japanese now, so I'm like, okay, I can be part of the foreign community now comfortably. That's what I've noticed. Like, I definitely run into people. As far as Seoul, I really was just focused on job hunting. I could talk about my time in Jeonju, which I was going to university, and of course, we were just like few foreigners. So we were always like going to the bars together and hanging out together and this kind of stuff. But that was because we lived in a small town and we all went to the same school. I would assume that Seoul is pretty similar to Tokyo in that way. I know that they have a lot of pub crawls in Seoul aimed for foreign audience. Definitely you can find a community there. Doesn't matter where you're from, and have a good time. Even if you don't speak the language, really.
People in Korea are very outgoing. They're definitely open to being friends with foreigners, which is cool. I think if you're into K-pop and you like K-drama and that type of society, like fashion and cute coffee shops and that kind of vibe, it's definitely a smaller city. So as an expat, you're more integrated with the community, and there are women's groups, men's groups that you can be a part of to meet people, and it's super easy, but you definitely have to work a little harder. Whereas in Tokyo, there's such a huge expat population. There's a lot more opportunities, I think, to meet foreigners here. So if you're not super social, I could see Japan being a little bit better of a place. You can be kind of more in your zone if you want, or you can venture out and meet people. It's a little easier to meet people here, I think.
I think in Korea you get different nationalities coming to Korea. Like you had a lot of like Polish or people from Uzbekistan. I think Korea has different ties. Like schools invite different people or give visas to certain countries, whereas Japan may be more Southeast Asia. You get more Vietnamese or Indonesian or maybe Filipinos, just different variety of people. So it was interesting to see like a lot of Polish people.
It's kind of easy to make friends with other foreigners because you're kind of both in a similar situation in terms of like being kind of, you know, in a situation where there's not as many of you compared to the general population. When I was in Korea, like I was very fortunate that the neighborhood I stayed in, it was like in Seoul, there's a neighborhood called Nowon, like a district, and there's many of these English language schools or just the hagwons in general. And so at that time, like on my street, there was very many foreign teachers and things like that. So it was quite easy to make a large like group of foreign friends.
I feel like I get along better with foreigners living in Japan than foreigners living in South Korea, though. Most of the people I met there, they are very into Korean drama or K-pop.
So as Americans, do you think Japan and Korea is more Americanized?
I feel like Tokyo is more Americanized in a lot of ways than Seoul, but Seoul's more modern in a lot of ways. Like their banking systems, those types of things can be done online. Here it's more like paper-based system, like everything's still running with files and paperwork and things like that.
Japanese.
In some ways, like Seoul is like very Western. I think with their fashion, they're more Western, and then they're much more digital. Japan and Tokyo remind me a lot of New York City as well. So in some ways.
Korean people are pretty international as it is. There's many Koreans living abroad. I was just thinking about my hometown. So I'm from like Orange County, California. There's so many Korean people in Orange County, Southern California, whereas there's not so many Japanese people.
Right.
And I just think that's because maybe Japanese people tend to want to stay in Japan rather than live abroad. Of course, there's Japanese people in like Hawaii and Brazil, they say, but these days, I think like Korean people are maybe a bit more international or interested in, you know, the US and other countries.
In Korea, tattoos are still technically illegal without like a medical license, but the tattoo culture and I guess the Western influence in Seoul is so big that you can see tattoos in a lot of places, and a lot of people, even who are working like corporate jobs, they'll have like small tattoos, and especially in really popular districts like Hongdae, people will be covered with tattoos. Like you'll see people with neck tattoos, and like it's not particularly super common, but it's still accepted. But the second that I got to Tokyo, I bought like long sleeves because I felt like not uncomfortable with tattoos, but I felt like I was making other people uncomfortable.
You noticed that?
Yeah, I noticed it, as well as like when I was trying to sign up to go to like the gym and other places, I saw signs that said you have to cover up your tattoos, like you can have tattoos here. And it was just a really big shock for me because I had assumed that it was similar to Korea where it's still stigmatized, but it's not necessarily something that you would feel so deeply, you know?
When it comes to beauty standards for women, any differences you noticed?
Yeah, so when I was living in Korea, I became like more aware and more like self-critical of myself than ever. And I think it's just because there's a lot more like emphasis placed on just visual. And I think it didn't help like working in like a K-pop industry where so much of like, you know, things are about like how you look and like, you know, how you're appearing on camera and stuff like that. Beauty standards may be similar, but I think there's just more emphasis placed on it in Korea, which, you know, I found it made me a lot more insecure than I am living here. I think in general, the beauty standards are similar, but I think like, you know, there's more like smaller things like beauty marks, like a lot of Koreans like they have a surgery to put moles because it's like a sign of beauty, but not too many, just like one in like the right place.
I noticed that in Japan.
Yeah, but I mean in general, yeah, like pale skin, tall, long legs, big eyes, like I'm not sure what, like not a flat nose, but like a raised nose. Like there's so many different beauty standards that are, present.
People in Korea get plastic surgery, most everybody, because of the beauty standard and the expectation is so high, regardless of gender. I have a lot of male friends who have been either pressured by their families or just felt internally like they needed to get plastic surgery either to fit societal standards or to get a job. Like, because I don't know how it is necessarily in Korea now, but what used to happen is you had to take your photo and you have to tape it to your resume. I heard that they evaluate you based off of that because people's perceptions are so based off of your appearance. And they judge a lot of things based off of that.
In Korea, it's more strict about this. Like you can feel more the pressure of being pretty. In Japan, I feel like people is a bit more natural though. So maybe I feel more comfortable in Japan about that.
もうファッションその着方がもう日本人やっぱ日本人は自分の好きなもの、その時自分のこだわりを着てる、個性を大事にしてる、で逆に韓国人の方はその流行りの時流行ってた芸能人さんがそれを着てたらみんなそれ着るみたいな、みんな同じになっちゃうんだよねって。
You're from Japan, so obviously you speak Japanese, English, and you also learn Korea, right? So when it comes to learning the language, any differences you noticed?
What I loved about learning Korean was that a lot of the words, I would say, I think I learned that about 80% of the words comes from kanji. If you know how to read one kanji in Korean, there's no other way of reading it. So then if you start seeing those patterns, you start thinking, oh, I know what that means because that means this, or like you know how to pronounce it. So there's no onyomi or kunyomi as in the Japanese system. It's like so easy. So once you start getting a hang of that, you start to, it gets easier. Yeah.
Pronunciation is easier with Japanese. It's like closer to Spanish pronunciation. But the problem is the kanji. There are a lot. Foreigners tend to forget the kanjis and they have a lot of like different pronunciations for the same kanji. So it's a bit more complicated to learn how to read and how to write. But it's easier to understand, I think, because it's similar pronunciation.
So I kind of grew up hearing Korean language, so I think learning Korean was easier for me. But because I learned Korean first, learning Japanese, it feels really similar to Korean, like the sentence structure and even a lot of words, they're so similar. So I think if I didn't learn Korean first, it would be kind of harder to learn Japanese. But because I learned Korean, like I'm finding it's actually kind of fun to learn Japanese.
難しいのは発音ですね。日本語の発音ってすごい少なくって、音の数が少なくって、英語とかもそうだと思うんですけど、音にしない音とかそういう言葉を作るんですけど、その韓国語もあって発音が難しかったです。
I learned Japanese before I started studying Korean. So when I started studying Korean, I didn't study Korean through English. I studied Korean through Japanese because grammatic structure is the same and there's a lot of similar words. But let's take a step back. Let's pretend I don't speak Japanese at all and I only speak English. Learning Japanese, you'll be able to speak Japanese a lot easier than speaking Korean. Korean, you have to have like good pronunciation. Your pronunciation has to be accurate, or there could be times where the other person doesn't even know what the heck you're talking about. When it comes to reading and writing, Korean is super easy. Once you learn it, you know it. You could read everything. Maybe you don't know what it says. But in Japanese, obviously you have kanji, Chinese characters, and hiragana and katakana. So it's way more difficult.
Can you say something in Japanese and Korean so that people can tell you're speaking both?
2016年から20年まで住んでいまして、コロナが始まった時、カリフォルニアに行って、急に日本に戻ることができなかったんですよ。日本に行けなかったら、韓国に行こうとして、2年間韓国に住んでたら、去年ちょっと前ぐらい日本に帰ってきました。日本に住むのが好きなんですので,しばらく日本にいます. 한국도 정말 한국에서 살고 싶었어요. 근데 취업할 때는 일을 잘 못 찾지만 비자 받을 수 없었어요. 그래서 어쩔 수 없이 다시 일본으로 들어왔어요. 일본에도 한국에도 둘 다 살기 좋아하는데 외국인이라면 아마 한국보다 일본은 더 기회가 많아요.
안녕하세요. 저는 샤넬이라고 하고요. 한국, 미국混血입니다. 한국에서 거의 2년 동안 자랐는데 일 때문에 도쿄로 이사 왔어요. 반갑습니다.
저는 미아라는 이름으로 일본에서 활동하고 있습니다. 앞으로 관심 많이 부탁합니다. 저 일본에서 노래를 나왔는데 미아오라는 노래를 있어요. 많이 들어주세요.
東京出身のアリシャです。韓国に6ヶ月間住んでいて、今は日本に戻って住んでいます. 반가워요. 아리샤라고 합니다. 한국 음식이 좋아해요.
Any message for those who's gonna live in Japan?
Live in Japan.
Also Korea. Separate. Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of like universal. Do your best to learn the language,
Both.
Korean or Japanese. Doesn't matter where you live. I mean, I can't express that enough. If you don't, imagine if you lived here for like 10, 15 years, but you don't speak the language. You'd be walking around like a blind, deaf, and mute person. You can't even have a simple understanding of what's going on around you. Your whole ecosystem would be foreigners. マジでもったいない. I don't know how to say in English. もったいない. I kind of forgot.
Kind of wasting.
It's such
like,
a waste. I mean,
chance
it's so sad. I'm not saying like you have to learn it, but your life will only be so much better if you could at least have a simple conversation in Korean or Japanese.
Okay, thank you for watching so far. How was it? That was interesting. I've always wanted to make a video about Japan and Korea, and it was pretty hard to find people who actually lived in like both countries. So thank you for all the interviews. If you have experience visiting Japan and Korea, how did you like these countries? What are the differences you noticed? Let me know in the comments. Okay, anyway, thank you for watching. If you like this video, click the like button. Please subscribe to my channel. If you have any question you want me to ask people in Japan, please leave a comment too. See you next time.